It was a chilly Friday morning in downtown Chicago, the kind of day when the city felt alive with the rhythm of ambition and arrogance. The streets were full of businessmen in crisp suits, women in sleek coats, holding Starbucks cups, and the endless rush of people who believed success was something you could measure by the shine on your shoes. But walking quietly among them was a woman who didn't fit that world. Her name was Evelyn Carter, a soft-spoken woman in her early 60s. She wore an old beige coat, faded at the sleeves, and her hair, silver and tied neatly into a bun, peeked out from under a knitted hat she had made herself. In her hand she clutched a worn leather purse and an envelope that carried something far more important than anyone around her could imagine. She moved slowly down the sidewalk, occasionally stopping to let people pass, always polite, always smiling faintly. But her eyes told another story, one of exhaustion, of years spent working harder than anyone ever noticed, and of a life that had taught her that appearances often deceived. Evelyn stopped in front of the Metropolitan Trust Bank, one of the most prestigious financial institutions in the city. The building towered above her like a monument to power, marble steps, glass doors, and gold lettering gleaming in the cold morning sun. She hesitated for a moment, looking up at it as if remembering something from long ago. Then she took a deep breath and stepped inside. The interior was as grand as any luxury hotel lobby. Crystal chandeliers glimmered overhead. The marble floors were spotless, reflecting the glow of modern art installations. Behind long counters, tellers typed quickly, their manicured nails clicking against keyboards. Everyone inside seemed perfectly composed, except for Evelyn, who stood awkwardly near the entrance, unsure where to go. A young receptionist wearing a sharp black suit noticed her and frowned. "Can I help you, ma'am?" she asked in a tone that was polite, but clearly forced. Evelyn nodded gently. "Yes, dear," she said softly. "I'm here to cash a check." The receptionist's eyes dropped to Evelyn's clothes, the scuffed shoes, the threadbare scarf, the simple purse. Her polite smile turned into something closer to pity. "Of course," she said slowly, as if speaking to a child. "You can go see one of the tellers. But if your check is large, you'll need the manager's approval." "Thank you," Evelyn said, smiling faintly again. She didn't seem to notice the girl's tone, or maybe she chose not to. She made her way to the back of the line, patiently waiting while people ahead of her made deposits, transfers, and loud phone calls about money they didn't really own. When her turn finally came, she stepped up to the counter where a young teller with glossy hair and sharp eyeliner barely glanced up. "Yes?" the teller said flatly. Evelyn carefully opened her purse and pulled out the envelope. Inside was a single check. She slid it across the counter. "I'd like to deposit this, please." The teller picked it up casually, and then froze. Her eyebrows shot up. She looked at the check again, turning it over, making sure she'd read the number correctly. It was made out for $3,200,000. For a long moment, the teller just stared at it. Then she let out a short, nervous laugh. "This can't be right," she muttered, waving the check toward her coworker. "Hey, take a look at this." Within seconds, 2 other employees came over, glancing at the paper and whispering among themselves. One of them giggled. Another smirked. Evelyn stood quietly, clutching her purse. Finally, the teller said, "Ma'am, where did you get this check?" "My late husband left it to me," Evelyn replied softly. "He said I should bring it here when the time was right." The teller rolled her eyes. "Uh-huh. Right. I'm sorry, but we can't just cash something like this without verification. You'll need to speak to the branch manager." Evelyn nodded, calm as ever. "That's fine, dear. I can wait." The teller sighed dramatically and picked up the phone. A moment later, a tall man in an expensive navy suit walked out of an office. His name was Richard Halston, the branch manager. His confidence filled the room before his voice even did. He approached the counter, his expression already skeptical. "What seems to be the problem?" "This woman is trying to deposit a check," the teller said, smirking. "For over $3 million. Halston turned to Evelyn, scanning her from head to toe. The wrinkled coat, the old purse, the shoes that had seen better decades, everything about her screamed out of place. He smiled thinly. Is that so? Evelyn smiled politely. Yes, sir. My husband told me this was the right bank to come to. He always trusted Metropolitan Trust. Halston chuckled under his breath, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Of course he did. He took the check and examined it. The signature was real, he recognized it instantly. It belonged to the founder of the bank, Charles Whitmore, who had passed away years ago. But the idea that this frail old woman could possibly be connected to Whitmore, much less deserving of $3 million, was laughable to him. He looked up, a cruel spark flickering in his eyes. I think someone's been playing a little joke on you, ma'am, he said loudly enough for nearby customers to hear. A few people turned to look. This check is obviously fake. People try this kind of thing all the time. You can't expect me to believe. He stopped, pretending to look closer at the paper, and then smirked again. $3 million? In your name? That's cute. A soft murmur rippled through the room. Some customers chuckled quietly. Others watched in awkward silence as Evelyn stood there, unmoving, her eyes fixed on the man tearing her dignity apart in front of strangers. She spoke calmly, her voice barely above a whisper. I assure you, sir, it's not a joke. Halston laughed openly this time. Ma'am, even if it wasn't, you'd have to meet a minimum account balance to even process something like this. Maybe you should try a community credit union. They're more your speed. He waved the check dismissively and turned toward his office. We're done here. Evelyn reached out, her hand trembling slightly. Please, sir, that check is important. Halston turned, his patience gone. Important? You know what's important, ma'am? Not wasting my time with fake documents. And with that, he tore the check clean in half, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent bank lobby. The room went still. The receptionist gasped. The tellers froze. Evelyn's lips parted in disbelief. Not anger, not even sadness, just quiet shock. Halston dropped the shredded check into the trash bin beside the counter, and dusted off his hands as if he'd done something noble. There, he said coldly. Now no one can try to cash it again. Evelyn stood there for a long moment, her heart pounding softly. The humiliation stung, but she didn't react. Instead, she slowly lifted her eyes, meeting his gaze with something he didn't expect, composure. I see, she said softly. Thank you for your time. And with that, she turned and began walking toward the door, her old shoes tapping gently against the marble floor. No one knew that in less than 24 hours, the same man who had just torn up her check would be on his knees begging for forgiveness. The following morning, the city woke up to a crisp blue sky. Evelyn stirred her tea slowly, lost in thought. Her husband's voice echoed in her memory, calm, wise, and full of quiet power. Never let them define your worth, Evelyn, he used to say. There will come a time when people will see who you truly are. And when that time comes, let your actions speak louder than your pain. The day before had been painful, yes, but Evelyn was not a woman who broke easily. She had been tested too many times in life to let one arrogant man shake her spirit. What the bank manager didn't know, what no one in that building knew, was that Evelyn Carter was not just a widow with a torn check. She was, in fact, the majority shareholder of Metropolitan Trust Bank itself. Her late husband, Thomas Whitmore, had founded the bank decades ago, building it from nothing. When he passed away, most of the public believed his assets had gone to his business partners. Few realized that he had left the majority of his stock, and ultimate ownership of the bank, to his wife. Evelyn had chosen to remain silent about it for years, preferring peace over prestige. She let the executives run the institution, while she watched quietly from afar. But yesterday changed everything. The disrespect, the arrogance, the way that man had torn up something tied to her husband's legacy, it stirred something deep inside her. She wasn't angry for herself. She was angry for Thomas, for what he built, and for how far the bank had fallen from his vision of integrity and respect for all people, regardless of how they looked or where they came from. Evelyn stood up slowly, setting her teacup down. She opened a drawer and pulled out a sleek black folder. Inside were official documents, her ownership certificates, the transfer of shares, and the legal will that made her the primary owner of Metropolitan Trust Bank. At the bottom of the folder was another item, a golden access card that gave her entry to the executive floor of the corporate headquarters. She smiled faintly, her calm demeanor returning. "It's time," she whispered to herself. Later that morning, as employees bustled into the bank to start their day, rumors about the crazy old woman with the fake check were already spreading. The tellers laughed about it between customers. Even the manager, Richard Halston, joked about it in his office, boasting to his assistant about how he taught that woman a lesson. "People need to understand," he said smugly, sipping his coffee. "This is a world for professionals. You can't just walk in here looking like you came off a farm and expect to be taken seriously." His assistant, a young woman named Lindsay, forced a polite laugh, though she felt uncomfortable. Something about the situation had bothered her. The woman hadn't seemed like a liar, she'd seemed genuine, almost regal, in her calmness. But she didn't say anything. Around 10:30 a.m., the main doors of the bank opened once again, and Evelyn Carter walked in. This time, however, she wasn't holding an envelope or a check. She was carrying a small leather briefcase. Her coat was neatly brushed, her shoes polished, and though she still looked simple, there was an undeniable grace about her, a quiet strength that made people turn their heads. The receptionist who had seen her the day before froze. "Oh, you're back," she said awkwardly. "Ma'am, if this is about yesterday." "It is," Evelyn replied softly, her tone calm but firm. "And I'd like to speak with your branch manager." The receptionist hesitated, glancing toward Halston's office. "Of course. I'll let him know." She picked up the phone, her voice trembling slightly. Moments later, Halston emerged, the same smirk plastered across his face. "Well, if it isn't my favorite customer," he said sarcastically. "Listen, ma'am, I don't know what kind of prank you're trying to pull, but I don't appreciate." Evelyn lifted her hand gently, cutting him off without a word. The confidence in her eyes stopped him mid-sentence. "I'm not here for a deposit," she said quietly. "I'm here for a meeting. Please gather your staff in the conference room. I won't take much of your time." Halston blinked in confusion. "A meeting? With my staff?" "Yes," she replied. "And I suggest you also invite your regional director. I'll be speaking with him as well." Now it was his turn to laugh. "Oh, that's rich. You think you can just walk into my bank and call a meeting with my staff?" Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "Your bank?" she asked softly, her tone gentle but edged with something he couldn't quite read. "Yes, my branch," he corrected quickly. "This is my domain, ma'am. You can't just—" Before he could finish, a voice called from behind. "Mrs. Carter?" Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway was Mr. Douglas Avery, the regional director, a tall, distinguished man in his 50s who oversaw multiple branches of Metropolitan Trust. He looked surprised but pleased to see Evelyn. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," he said warmly. "I wasn't expecting you today." Halston's jaw dropped. He looked from the director to the woman, his confidence cracking for the first time. You know her?" he stammered. Mr. Avery smiled. "Of course I do. She's the primary shareholder of this bank. Technically speaking, she's your boss's boss's boss." The room went silent. You could hear the ticking of the wall clock. The color drained from Halston's face as Evelyn turned to look at him, not with anger, but with the same quiet grace she'd shown before. "I believe," she said softly, "you tore up something that didn't belong to you yesterday." Halston's throat went dry. His mind spun in circles, searching for an explanation, a defense, anything. But there was nothing. Every employee in the lobby was now staring, their smug amusement replaced by disbelief and shame. Evelyn stepped closer to him, her eyes calm but commanding. "You said this was your bank," she continued. But you were mistaken. This institution was built by people who believed in respect, not arrogance. My husband started this bank with a dream of helping those who were overlooked by others. I think you would be disappointed to see how far it's drifted." Halston's lips moved, but no sound came out. His once confident smirk had vanished completely. Evelyn turned toward Mr. Avery. "Please gather the staff in the conference room. We need to talk." Avery nodded immediately. "Of course, Mrs. Carter." As the staff began to move, whispers filled the air. "She owns the bank? That's her? The woman from yesterday?" Evelyn didn't look at them. She simply walked forward, her posture straight, her steps steady. The same woman they had mocked now moved like someone who commanded the entire room, and in truth, she did. By the time they reached the conference room, everyone in the branch knew this simple woman they had laughed at was the owner of everything they stood in. The air in the conference room was thick with tension. Every employee had gathered, from the tellers who had giggled behind the counters to the senior staff who now sat nervously along the long, polished table. The blinds were half drawn, allowing streaks of sunlight to cut across the sleek floor. The ticking clock on the wall was the only sound until Evelyn Carter walked in. She didn't rush. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Mr. Avery, the regional director, followed respectfully behind her, while Richard Halston, the once proud manager, trailed a few steps back, pale and trembling, his arrogance now completely gone. Evelyn stopped at the head of the table. For a long moment she simply looked at the faces before her, the faces that had judged her, mocked her, and dismissed her as a nobody. None of them could meet her eyes now. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, almost soothing, yet each word carried a weight that filled the entire room. "Yesterday," she began, "I walked into this bank as a customer, quietly, politely, and with a simple request. I came here hoping to deposit a check. That's all. I didn't ask for special treatment. I didn't demand recognition. I simply expected respect, the same respect every customer deserves." Her eyes moved across the room, pausing briefly on the tellers, then on Halston. No one dared to move. "But instead of respect," she continued, "I was met with laughter, whispering, condescension. I was told I didn't belong here. My check was torn in half, and my dignity was stepped on, all because of the way I looked." The silence grew deeper. A few employees shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, guilt flashing across their faces. "What none of you knew," Evelyn said softly, "was that the woman you humiliated yesterday was the one who signs your paychecks." Gasps rippled through the room. The truth had already been whispered among them, but hearing it from her directly, spoken so calmly, so powerfully, hit like a thunderclap. She continued, her tones still even but her eyes sharper now. "For years I stayed behind the scenes. I watched as this bank grew, as new management took over, as policies changed. I believed in giving people the chance to do the right thing, to lead with integrity. But yesterday showed me something deeply troubling. It showed me that the values this institution was founded on, honesty, compassion, fairness, are being forgotten." Evelyn turned slightly toward Mr. Avery. "Douglas, how many complaints have we received from customers about rude or discriminatory behavior in this branch?" Mr. Avery cleared his throat. "Several, ma'am. Too many, if I'm being honest. I've addressed them with Mr. Halston before." Evelyn nodded. "And what was his response?" Avery hesitated before answering. "He dismissed them, Mrs. Carter. He said the customers were overreacting." A heavy silence fell. Evelyn looked back at Halston, who sat frozen, his hands trembling slightly on the table. His mind raced for excuses, but the truth was too obvious. "I see," she said quietly. "So this wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern." Halston finally spoke, his voice cracking. "Mrs. Carter, please, if I had known who you were." Evelyn raised a hand gently, stopping him cold. "That's the problem, Mr. Halston. You would have treated me differently if you had known who I was. But true character isn't shown by how you treat people you think are important. It's shown by how you treat people you think aren't. Her words hit like a hammer. Some of the employees lowered their heads, unable to look at her. Others blinked away tears, the shame settling deep in their hearts. Evelyn stepped closer to the center of the room. This bank was built on the belief that everyone deserves to be treated with respect, from the wealthiest investor to the janitor cleaning the floors. My late husband, Thomas Whitmore, founded Metropolitan Trust with that exact mission. But somewhere along the way, we lost sight of it. She paused, glancing toward a framed picture on the wall, the original bank founders standing proudly in front of their first branch decades ago. Her husband's face was there, smiling, kind, proud, humble. My husband used to say, "You can't measure a person's worth by their clothes or their wallet. You measure it by their heart." And yesterday, I saw a lot of small hearts in a very big building. Her words hung heavy in the air. You could hear sniffles from one of the tellers in the back, a young woman who had been one of the first to laugh at Evelyn when she walked in the day before. Evelyn took a deep breath and straightened. "No," she said firmly. "It's time to make things right." Her calm voice turned into quiet authority, the voice of a leader reclaiming her power. "Effective immediately," she said, turning to Mr. Avery. "Mr. Halston is relieved of his duties. His behavior has been a stain on this institution for too long. We need leadership that uplifts, not tears people down." The room gasped again. Halston's face went pale as paper. He opened his mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. The humiliation he had once inflicted on her had come full circle, only this time, it was quiet, final, and righteous. "Mrs. Carter," he whispered. "Please." Evelyn met his eyes one last time. "You tore up something that symbolized honesty and trust. Consider this my way of mending it, by tearing up what no longer belongs here." Halston lowered his gaze. Security quietly stepped forward at Mr. Avery's signal. The disgraced manager rose slowly, his head down, and walked out of the room in silence. No one spoke. No one dared. When the door closed behind him, Evelyn turned back to the employees. "I don't want this place to run on fear," she said softly. "I want it to run on respect. Every person who walks through those doors, no matter how they look, speak, or dress, deserves kindness. We will rebuild this bank, starting today, on the principles it was meant to stand for." Her voice softened again, warm yet commanding. "Each of you has a choice, to be part of that change or to walk away. If you choose to stay, then you'll treat every customer like they matter. Because they do." The employees nodded, many with tears in their eyes. The weight of her words lingered long after the meeting ended. As the staff dispersed quietly, whispers of admiration replaced the laughter that had once filled those halls. They spoke her name differently now, not with mockery, but with awe. Evelyn remained alone for a moment in the room, looking at her husband's photograph on the wall. She smiled softly. "You were right, Thomas," she whispered. "They see now." Then she turned and walked out, her steps calm, her spirit steady, her dignity unshakable. By the end of the day, every branch of Metropolitan Trust Bank would hear about what happened. A simple woman had walked in as a nobody, and left as the hero who restored the heart of an entire institution. By the next morning, the story had already begun to spread like wildfire. What had happened inside the Metropolitan Trust Bank wasn't just another corporate scandal, it was a moral awakening. News outlets across Chicago picked it up first. Local reporters couldn't believe that the so-called simple woman in plain clothes was actually Evelyn Carter Whitmore, the majority owner and widow of the bank's founder. It started with a single tweet from a young bank teller named Melissa, who had been in the room during the confrontation. She had gone home that night unable to sleep, haunted by the shame of how she and her coworkers had treated Evelyn. Her post read, "I witnessed something today that changed the way I see people forever. A humble woman walked into our bank, mocked by our manager. He tore her check in front of everyone. Turns out she owns the entire bank. And she fired him in front of us all. Lesson learned, never judge a book by its cover." Within hours, that tweet exploded. Thousands of comments poured in, people sharing similar stories of being judged, humiliated, or underestimated. Others praised Evelyn for her quiet strength and dignity. By sunrise, hashtags like hashtag the owner we didn't know and hashtag respect everyone were trending nationwide. Major networks began calling Metropolitan Trust's headquarters. Reporters stood outside the building, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman who had humiliated arrogance itself with nothing but grace. Inside her spacious office overlooking Lake Michigan, Evelyn sat calmly, sipping her coffee. She wasn't the type to chase headlines, but she understood the power of moments like this. Across from her sat Douglas Avery, the regional director, looking equal parts amazed and anxious. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "we've had over 2,000 messages from customers and even other banks. Everyone wants to hear from you. Some are suggesting you give an interview." Evelyn smiled faintly. "An interview? No, Douglas. I don't need attention. I need people to reflect. Sometimes silence speaks louder than cameras." Douglas nodded, though he couldn't help but admire her composure. Most people, if humiliated like she had been, would have sought revenge or public glory. But Evelyn, she was different. Her power came from humility, not pride. As the morning went on, the bank phones wouldn't stop ringing. Some callers were angry, investors worried about the scandal. Others were inspired, customers expressing gratitude and promising loyalty. One even said, "I'm closing my account everywhere else and moving it to your bank. Finally, a place with real values." Meanwhile, the former manager, Richard Halston, became the most hated man in the city overnight. Photos of him escorting Evelyn out of the branch, captured by security cameras, began circulating online. He was unshaven, tired, and visibly shaken as reporters camped outside his apartment. "No comment," was all he managed to say before slamming the door. But the damage was done. His arrogance had been broadcast for the world to see, and now he had become a living example of what happens when pride blinds decency. Back at the bank, Evelyn's quiet leadership began to ripple through every department. She didn't call for punishment or revenge. Instead, she called for change. She gathered the remaining staff later that afternoon in the same conference room where she had fired Halston. The mood this time was completely different. "Yesterday," she began, "we had a moment of reckoning. Today, we begin rebuilding. I don't want this bank to be known for what happened. I want it to be known for what we do after it." The employees listened intently, their eyes fixed on her. She wasn't angry, she was inspiring. "We'll start with training," she continued. "Every single person, from the janitor to the top executive, will go through empathy and respect workshops. We'll also establish a policy that ensures no customer, ever again, will be judged by appearance, clothing, or status. We serve people, not profiles." The room filled with nods of agreement. For the first time in years, the employees felt proud to be part of something meaningful again. Evelyn's message was spreading, not just as a story of revenge, but as a movement of redemption. Later that day, Evelyn received a handwritten letter from a customer in another city. It read, "Mrs. Carter, I saw your story on TV. I'm a single mother who was denied a loan last year because the manager said I didn't look reliable. Your story gave me hope that one day, things will change. Thank you for standing up for people like me." Evelyn folded the letter carefully, a tear escaping down her cheek. She placed it inside her husband's old leather notebook, the one he used to carry during the early days of the bank. She whispered softly, "You'd be proud, Thomas." Meanwhile, across social media, debates were raging. Some argued that Evelyn's approach was too soft, that people like Halston didn't deserve second chances. Others defended her grace, saying that true leadership was about teaching, not punishing. But amid all the noise, one truth stood out clearly: Evelyn had changed the conversation. She had reminded people that humility is not weakness, it's strength in its purest form. That night, a news anchor ended her segment with a simple statement that resonated across the nation. "In a world where people chase status and appearance, one woman reminded us that power wears no uniform, and respect should never depend on what someone looks like." Evelyn didn't watch the broadcast. Instead, she spent her evening in the quiet of her home, feeding her cat, tending to her garden, and watching the sunset reflect off the water. For her, peace wasn't found in the applause of strangers, it was found in knowing she had restored something far greater: human decency. But little did she know, her story was far from over. The board of directors was about to hold an emergency meeting. And among the agenda items was a shocking proposal that would change the direction of the bank, and Evelyn's life, forever. The following morning, the towering glass headquarters of Metropolitan Trust Bank gleamed in the early Chicago sunlight. But beneath its polished surface, tension was brewing. The board of directors, an assembly of some of the most influential and powerful figures in the financial industry, had called an emergency meeting. Their purpose wasn't to celebrate Evelyn Carter Whitmore's leadership, it was to contain the situation. By the time Evelyn arrived, the mood in the conference room was thick with discomfort. 12 men and women sat around the long mahogany table, whispering in low tones. Some avoided her eyes, others gave forced smiles. She could feel it, the unease, the fear, the pride clashing with guilt. At the head of the table sat Charles Hinton, the interim chairman. A shrewd businessman in his late 60s, Charles had worked with Evelyn's late husband for decades, but his loyalty had always leaned toward profits, not principles. He cleared his throat as she entered. "Evelyn," he began, forcing a smile, "thank you for joining us on such short notice." She nodded politely. "Of course, Charles. I assume this is about yesterday." He adjusted his cufflinks. "Indeed. What happened has created quite a storm. The video footage has gone viral, investors are anxious, and the press won't stop calling. The public loves the story, but we're not sure it's the kind of attention a financial institution needs." Evelyn crossed her arms, her calm gaze steady. "So what you're saying is, the truth makes you uncomfortable." A few directors shifted in their seats. Charles sighed. "It's not about the truth, Evelyn. It's about optics. The way things look. You firing a manager in front of customers might seem impulsive." Her tone remained firm. "Impulsive is tearing up a customer's check because you think they're beneath you. What I did was justice, and if our investors have a problem with that, maybe we need new investors." A murmur spread across the table. Some of the younger directors, clearly inspired by her, nodded slightly. But others, those who had spent their careers protecting image over integrity, frowned. Charles leaned forward. "Evelyn, listen to me. You've done remarkable things for this bank. No one is denying that. But we have to think long term. The story is spiraling. We're being painted as a symbol of discrimination and class arrogance. We need to take control of the narrative." "And how do you propose we do that?" she asked. He exchanged glances with Margaret Doyle, the bank's head of public relations, who cleared her throat and said, "We suggest issuing a formal statement, one that distances the bank from the incident. Something like, the actions of a single employee do not reflect our institution's values. It would calm investors and protect our reputation." Evelyn's expression hardened. "So you want me to pretend that what happened was isolated? That the culture that allowed it doesn't exist?" Margaret hesitated. "It's the politically safe approach." "Safe?" Evelyn repeated softly. "You know, my husband used to say something, safety is where innovation goes to die. He didn't build this bank by being safe. He built it by being human." Silence fell over the room. Evelyn stood, walking toward the tall windows that overlooked the city. "Look outside," she said. "That city is full of people who've been dismissed, judged, and ignored by institutions like ours. Yesterday wasn't a scandal. It was a wake-up call." Charles's jaw tightened. "And what if this wake-up call costs us millions in losses, Evelyn? What if investors pull out? What if the stock drops?" She turned to face him, her voice calm but powerful. "Then we rebuild with people who believe in something bigger than profit. Because if we don't stand for respect and equality, we stand for nothing at all." Her words hit like a thunderclap. Even Charles, ever the strategist, couldn't hide the flicker of admiration behind his eyes. Then, one of the younger board members, Daniel Hughes, spoke up. Mrs. Whitmore is right. For years, we've ignored how customers feel when they walk through our doors. This incident may have been humiliating for us, but it's also an opportunity to rebuild trust. Margaret frowned. Daniel, you're new here. You don't understand how fragile reputation is in this business. He shook his head. No, Margaret. I think we've misunderstood what reputation should mean. It's not about appearing perfect. It's about being accountable. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Daniel's courage emboldened others. A few murmured in agreement. Evelyn smiled faintly. Change was beginning, even here. Charles, realizing he was losing control of the conversation, tapped his pen on the table. Enough. This board must vote on how to proceed. I propose that Evelyn step back temporarily from public representation of the bank until the issue dies down. It's standard crisis management protocol. The air went cold. Evelyn looked around the table, her heart heavy but resolute. You're asking me to hide, to silence the message that people need to hear most right now. Charles gave a small, almost patronizing shrug. It's for the bank's protection. Evelyn straightened her shoulders. Then maybe this bank doesn't deserve my protection. Gasps filled the room. For a moment, no one breathed. She reached into her bag and placed a thick envelope on the table. Inside are documents outlining a new initiative, a community investment program that offers financial education and opportunities to underprivileged families across the country. It's what my husband and I always dreamed of creating. If this board refuses to back it, I'll withdraw my shares and build it myself. Charles's eyes widened. You wouldn't. Oh, I would. She interrupted softly. And trust me, I have the resources to make it happen. A heavy silence hung over the boardroom. Evelyn's presence, calm, unshakable, commanding, filled every corner. One by one, members looked at each other, unsure what to say. Finally, Daniel spoke again. I'll vote in favor of Evelyn's proposal. Then another voice joined him. And another. When the count was done, the decision was clear. Evelyn's vision had won. The board would publicly support her initiative and use the scandal not as a shield but as a spark for change. Charles leaned back, defeated but oddly relieved. Well, he murmured, it seems the board has spoken. Evelyn smiled, though her eyes softened with emotion. No, Charles. The people have spoken. We're just finally listening. As she left the room, every head turned toward her. They weren't watching a CEO's widow anymore. They were watching a leader. A woman who had reminded them that integrity still mattered in a world obsessed with appearances. That night, as Evelyn walked along the quiet lakeside near her home, the city lights flickered on the water like stars. She thought of her husband, of the bank they had built, and of the future they had always imagined, one rooted not in power, but in purpose. And though she knew the road ahead would be long, she also knew this: the tide had turned. The world had finally begun to see what true strength looked like, and it wasn't dressed in arrogance. It was dressed in grace. In the weeks that followed the explosive board meeting, the story of Evelyn Carter Whitmore spread across America like wildfire. What began as a humiliating moment in a single bank branch had become a nationwide conversation about dignity, equality, and respect. Social media was flooded with clips of Evelyn's confrontation with the arrogant manager and inspiring quotes from her boardroom speech. People who had felt invisible, single mothers, blue-collar workers, farmers, small business owners, all began to share their own stories online under the hashtag #RespectOverRiches. Within days, that phrase had become a movement. Television talk shows discussed it. News anchors debated it. Church leaders quoted her words in Sunday sermons. Evelyn had struck a nerve in the heart of America, and the world was listening. Inside the gleaming glass tower of Metropolitan Trust Bank, a revolution was underway. The staff who had once looked down on ordinary people began to see the world differently. Evelyn's new initiative, the Carter Foundation for Financial Inclusion, had been officially approved. Its mission was simple but powerful: to help those who had been historically excluded from financial opportunities learn, grow, and build their futures. Every branch across the country was instructed to participate. They began hosting free financial literacy workshops on weekends, open to anyone, no account required. Local schools, community centers, and even churches partnered with the foundation to bring hope where it had once been denied. And at the heart of it all was Evelyn, not sitting in a boardroom, but standing shoulder to shoulder with everyday people. Cameras often caught her wearing the same modest clothes she had been mocked for that fateful day at the bank. To her, that outfit had become a symbol of truth, a reminder that one's worth is never defined by appearance or wealth. One chilly Saturday morning in Atlanta, Evelyn arrived at a small community event organized by the foundation. The crowd was buzzing with energy. Families, students, elderly couples, and small business owners had gathered, eager to learn and share their stories. As she stepped onto the small stage set up in the local park, the crowd erupted into applause. She took the microphone, smiling humbly. "When I walked into that bank that morning," she began, "I was just a woman trying to cash a check. I didn't know that moment would change everything. But I've realized something. Every time we let someone make us feel small, we give away our power. And today, I want every person here to take that power back." The crowd cheered, some holding handmade signs that read "Respect over riches" and "We all matter." Among the crowd was a young woman named Maya Johnson, a single mother who had struggled to open a business loan for years. She waited until the end of the event to speak to Evelyn personally. When her turn came, she held back tears as she said, "Mrs. Whitmore, I just want to thank you. Because of your program, I got approved for my first small business loan. My bakery opens next month." Evelyn smiled warmly and took Maya's hands. "You did that, sweetheart. You believed in yourself. That's where it starts." Later that night, back at her home in the quiet Chicago suburbs, Evelyn sat by her fireplace reading through dozens of letters from people whose lives had been changed by her foundation. There were handwritten notes from teenagers, veterans, and elderly widows, each one a testament to resilience and hope. One letter, however, stood out. It was from Thomas Reed, the former bank manager, the same man who had once mocked her and torn up her check. Evelyn hesitated before opening it, unsure what to expect. Inside was a short but heartfelt note. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've spent the last few weeks reflecting on my actions that day, and I am deeply ashamed. I've learned more about humility and respect from watching you handle this situation than I have in 20 years of banking. I've left my position at the bank and started volunteering with your foundation. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope my work can make a small difference. Thank you for showing me what true leadership looks like. Thomas Reed **. Evelyn exhaled slowly, her eyes glistening. People could change. Even those who once judged her had the capacity to grow. And that realization filled her heart with peace. The following morning, she received a call from the White House. The president himself had seen her story and wanted to meet her. A week later, Evelyn was sitting in the Oval Office, speaking about the power of compassion and the importance of financial equality. She wasn't a politician, and she didn't pretend to be one. She was a woman who had lived through prejudice, injustice, and condescension, and had turned that pain into progress. After the meeting, as she stood outside the White House steps surrounded by reporters, she said something that would go on to be quoted for years. "You can tear up a piece of paper, but you can't tear up a person's worth. True wealth isn't what's in your account, it's what's in your heart." That quote became the slogan for the Carter Foundation. It was printed on banners, websites, and even painted across murals in cities around the country. People everywhere, from New York to Los Angeles, from small Midwest towns to deep South communities, carried her message forward. Even major corporations began reevaluating their cultures. Other banks followed Evelyn's lead, adopting diversity and equality programs, improving customer treatment, and investing in underrepresented communities. Slowly but surely, the world began to shift. But for Evelyn, the greatest reward wasn't the fame or recognition. It was seeing the smiles of people who finally felt seen, the janitor opening his first savings account, the young woman launching her small business, the elderly couple no longer afraid to walk into a bank. And through it all, she never forgot that one humiliating day, the day that started it all. Because sometimes, the worst moments in life are the beginning of something far greater. That night, as she looked out her window and saw the city skyline glowing against the horizon, she whispered softly, "We did it, Henry." Her late husband's picture sat on the table beside her, smiling back. "We really did it." But what she didn't yet know was that her story, the woman who was mocked for being ordinary, was about to spark a global movement that no one could have predicted. Years passed, and the story of Evelyn Carter Whitmore became more than a viral moment. It became a chapter in modern American history. What had started as a single act of prejudice inside a marble-floored bank had evolved into a movement that redefined compassion, humility, and leadership. Under Evelyn's direction, the Carter Foundation for Financial Inclusion grew into one of the most respected philanthropic institutions in the country. Branches opened in over 30 states, reaching not only cities but also small rural towns where banks had long turned their backs on struggling communities. Every office carried the same banner: respect over riches. Evelyn had transformed from a woman who was once humiliated at a counter into a figure of national pride. Her photo, wearing the same simple floral dress she'd worn that infamous day, appeared on the cover of magazines like Time, Forbes, and The Atlantic, accompanied by headlines such as, "The Woman Who Redefined Wealth." But even with all the recognition, Evelyn remained the same woman who still cooked her own meals, tended to her small backyard garden, and greeted everyone she met with warmth. She never allowed success to harden her spirit. Each year, the foundation hosted a Day of Dignity, an event where volunteers across the country provided free financial guidance, meals, and small grants to struggling families. On the 10th anniversary of the foundation, the event was held in Atlanta, the city where it had all begun. The crowd gathered at Centennial Park was larger than anyone had expected. Thousands of people filled the square, holding signs, singing, and chanting her name. Among the attendees were countless people whose lives had been changed by her programs: single parents who had opened businesses, veterans who had bought their first homes, and children who had gone to college on foundation scholarships. As Evelyn stepped onto the stage, the crowd went silent. She was older now, her hair silver and her movements slower, but her eyes still sparkled with the same quiet fire that had once silenced a room full of arrogant bankers. She began speaking, her voice steady and gentle. 10 years ago, she said, a man tore up a piece of paper and thought he was tearing up my worth. He didn't know that moment would build an empire, not of money, but of purpose. You see, when someone disrespects you, you have two choices: you can let it define you, or you can let it drive you. She looked across the crowd, her gaze falling on the many faces watching her with admiration. Every person here has value. Every single one of you deserves respect, no matter what you wear, what you drive, or where you come from. I didn't start this foundation to prove I was powerful. I started it to remind the world that kindness is the greatest currency we have. The audience erupted into applause, some wiping away tears. Cameras flashed, and the moment was broadcast live across the country. Standing at the edge of the crowd was Maya Johnson, the single mother Evelyn had met years earlier. Now the proud owner of a thriving bakery chain called Sweet Rise, Maya held the hand of her young daughter. When the girl looked up at her mother and asked, "Mommy, who is that lady?" Maya smiled and said softly, "That's the woman who taught me that no one is too small to make a big change." After the event, Evelyn returned to her modest home in Chicago. Though she was now one of the most influential women in America, she still lived in the same neighborhood, among the same people. That night she sat on her porch, the city lights twinkling in the distance, and watched children play in the street. Her assistant, a young man named Caleb, approached with a tablet in his hand. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said gently, "you need to see this." On the screen was a global news headline: United Nations honors Evelyn Carter Whitmore for global humanitarian impact. Evelyn blinked in surprise. "The United Nations?" she whispered. Caleb nodded. "They're awarding you the Human Dignity Medal for changing lives around the world." Tears welled in her eyes. She had never set out for recognition, she only wanted fairness, humanity, and a little respect. And now, her message had reached the highest levels of leadership. 2 weeks later, Evelyn stood before the United Nations Assembly in New York City. Delegates from across the world listened as she gave what would become her final public speech, a message that echoed across generations. "Years ago, I was invisible," she began. "People saw my clothes, my skin, and my simplicity, and decided who I was before I ever spoke. But I stand here today not because I was wealthy, but because I refused to let someone else decide my worth. My hope for the world is that one day, we won't need foundations to teach dignity, because dignity will already live in every heart." The hall stood in silence for a few seconds before erupting into thunderous applause. Many in the audience stood, their eyes glistening. That moment was broadcast worldwide, touching millions of lives. When she returned home, Evelyn's health began to decline. But she never lost her smile, nor her warmth. Her final days were spent surrounded by her family, friends, and foundation staff, the people who had become her extended family. On a quiet spring morning, Evelyn passed away peacefully in her sleep. The news spread across the globe. Television networks paused regular programming to honor her life. The White House issued a statement calling her a national treasure who reminded us that humility and humanity can move mountains. A week later, thousands gathered for her memorial service. It was held at the same park in Atlanta where she had delivered her first foundation speech years earlier. People from all walks of life came: bankers, janitors, politicians, teachers, children, all united in gratitude. As Maya Johnson took the stage to deliver the closing eulogy, she said through tears, "Evelyn didn't just change my life. She changed all of ours. She proved that greatness doesn't come from money, but from meaning. And even though she's gone, her spirit will never leave us, because every time we treat someone with kindness, Evelyn lives again." At that moment, the crowd released thousands of white balloons into the sky, each one carrying a simple message printed in gold letters: "Respect over riches." As they floated higher, sunlight caught the balloons, making them shimmer like stars. It was as if the heavens themselves were honoring her legacy. That day, people didn't just mourn Evelyn Carter Whitmore, they celebrated her. They promised to live by her message, to see the unseen, to respect the overlooked, and to love without condition. Because in the end, Evelyn proved something the world will never forget: you can take away someone's check, but you can never take away their worth. And somewhere beyond the clouds, Evelyn smiled, knowing that the world she left behind was just a little kinder than the one she had found.